Good morning, church. It's Friday. Today's scripture passage for Weekly Word is from John, the second chapter. We are dealing with the story of Jesus' triumphant entry into Jerusalem according to John. This comes right after his miracle of turning water into wine. Jesus comes into Jerusalem, goes right to the temple, and sees the marketplace and is so filled with anger that he creates, according to John, a whip and casts out the money changers, fulfilling the line of the prophets, zeal for the Father's house will consume him. And in his exchange with some of the Jewish leaders, he says, tear down this temple and I will rebuild it in 3 days. And of course, he's not talking about the temple, he's talking about himself. If you know me, I, as a professional thorn in my side is when people say all the gospels say the same thing, like they're all the same voice. Today we have a glorious example of how John's voice is different from Matthew, Mark, and Luke. We get a very distinct flavor because this is the story that shows up in all the other three. It's the triumphant entry into Jerusalem. It's Palm Sunday. In Matthew, and what makes John special is a couple of things. Location, right? Palm Sunday. When does that happen in Jesus' life? Holy Week, like the last week of his life. In John, it's happening in chapter 2. What does that tell you about where this belongs? Where Jesus is as a placement in his ministry? Now, there's some folks who'll say it wasn't the only time Jesus went into Jerusalem, but the story of him cleansing the marketplace happens in the other Gospels. Fun stuff. Second, other good point, you get an angry Jesus. Now, I will say there are plenty of Christian organizations and Christian men who will use this passage to justify some pretty toxically masculine activity. No, you shouldn't do that. That's a misuse of Scripture. However, the majority of the folks watching this probably are from the Midwest, and anger is frequently seen as a sin. This passage shows that it's not. Even expressing anger, that's not a sin. How do you feel about that? How do you feel about a Jesus who can get so hot under the collar that he's flipping over tables, casting people out? Well, that was somebody's business. That was somebody's, that was how they fed their children. But he's so enraged that he actually has an outburst. How do you feel about that? Theologically, spiritually? What does that say about your anger? Finally, one of the things to take into consideration is actually the argument that what caused Jesus to be angry. Now, Jesus gets mad in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. In Matthew, Mark, and Luke, it's because the house has become a den of robbers. That is a big distinction from the house should be a house of prayer. Different medium. Den of robbers, that the people exchanging money and animals for temple sacrifice. Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John, what got Jesus mad is that people were manipulating the marketplace. But the system, having a marketplace, isn't the problem. Having a place where it was required, the institution needed a place for Jews who are coming to pray to make the offering. You see what's getting Jesus mad? What's getting Jesus mad is they are charging more for doves, which would have been cheap. Suddenly they're gouging the low-income people out of their offering to God. And so Jesus losing his cool over this gouge. In John, it's not about the gouge. It's the whole marketplace. It's the locus of where God is. Is God at the temple? In fact, Jesus not only says it's not about the temple, if you tear down the temple, God will rebuild it in 3 days. So, my friends, how do you feel? Starting with John, where do you find God? What should the purpose of church be? How should the church be a part of mediating that relationship between people and God? How are we part of the priests, the middle way? When we know that each person is created in the image and likeness of God, what then is the role of the church? Or maybe you're part of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. What is the marketplace that we hold that keeps people from experiencing God more directly? And how do you feel about emotions? Big emotions, consuming emotions. My friends, I'll see you Sunday.